Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We have been studying the portion of Akev on our Wednesday afternoon classes at 12:30. And last week and this week, we've just put that on hold temporarily as we're focusing on the situation in the world right now. I want to begin today with a story that took place in Ukraine, but going back some time, going back to 1911. There was someone that was born in Ukraine. His name was Mendel Beilis. He was born to a Hasidic family, although he himself was not religious. On March 12th of the year 1911, this is 1 month before Passover, there was a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy. His name was Andrei Yushinsky. And Andrei Yushinsky disappeared on his way to school. 8 days later, his body was found with multiple stab wounds. It was found near a cave that was near a brick factory. Mendel Beilis, who was a father of 5 children, worked at that brick factory right near the city of Kiev. We now are very familiar with the name of that city. So they picked Mendel Beilis because he worked in that brick factory, and they said, "You're the murderer." And he was arrested on July 21st, 1911. He spent 2 years in prison before any trial began. Meanwhile, during that 2-year period, this vicious anti-Semitic campaign was launched in the press against the entire Jewish community, which was then Russia and Ukraine. And what did they say took place? Well, the old blood libel came back. Being that this was a month before Passover, the Jews murdered this Christian boy to take his blood and use it for their matzah for Passover. You would have thought that this blood libel would have disappeared back then 500 years ago, but no, in 1911, it was still very much alive. The Mendel Beilis affair shook the ground under the entire Jewish world. Everyone was frightened by the outcome of this trial, because if this Jew was to be found guilty, you knew the pogroms were next. The trial began October 8th, 1913. Both sides had 2 years to prepare for this trial. The opposition, the prosecutors, led by fierce anti-Semites, had scholars go through the entire Torah and Talmud to try to pick out verses that they would be able to bring up at trial to show that Jews disrespect Gentiles. The Jewish side, Balin's attorneys, brought together some of the greatest rabbinic minds, some of the greatest scholars to be part of the defense team. And all the world was focused on this particular trial. The 12 jurors were chosen, their identities and ideologies thoroughly prepared prior to what was going to be a charade of the trial. And anti-Semites from all over the world gathered together to this courthouse near Kiev for the trial of Mendel Beilis. One of the critical questions that was brought up by the prosecution was the fact that there's a remark in the Talmud that's made that the Jewish people are called by the name Adam, while the nations of the world are not called by the name Adam. And therefore, they pointed out that you see Jewish literature says that the nations of the world are not called Adam. Adam means human. So you see, you're being taught in your schools that the non-Jewish world is called non-human. And being that you look at the non-Jewish world as non-human, certainly you felt that you had the right to murder a non-human. The defense attorney turns to the rabbis on his team. They had prepared for this. They were ready for this. They were ready for any verse that they can pick on. And Rabbi Yaakov Meza took to the floor. Rabbi Yaakov Meza, I believe he's from the family, if I'm not mistaken, from which Jackie Mason comes from. His ancestry. And he said to the jury and to the court and to the world, in Hebrew, every word has a singular form of it and a plural form of it. Ish means man. If you want to say men, you don't say ish, you say anashim. Isha is a woman singular. If you want to say women plural, you say nashim. If you want to say mountain singular, you say har. Mountains plural, harim. Apple, tapuach. Apples, tapuchim. Every word has a singular form and a plural form. There is one word, however, in Hebrew that does not have a plural form. That word is Adam. We don't say Adamim. So the word Adam, Adam, can only be applied to a single person. There is no plural form of it. Hence, none of the nations of the world could be called Adam, as a nation is comprised of many individuals. The exception, however, are the Jewish people. The Jewish people can be called Adam. Why? This doesn't mean that non-Jews are, God forbid, less than human. It's the Torah's way of making a statement that there was something about the title Adam which could not be applied to a nation with the exception of the Jewish people. Why? Because there may be millions of Jews around the world, but they're still called Adam. They're still considered a single human being. And then he points to the trial, to the room, to the court, to the jury. And he says, and this room proves my point. Look, you have one defendant here, Mendel Beilis. One defendant is accused of killing a child. But who's on trial? You didn't sit for 2 years pointing to the prosecutors to look for any evidence about the murder of this child. No. You looked through all of Jewish literature. Why? Because when one Jew is on trial, all the Jews of the world are on trial. We're all on trial. Imagine if a Russian Gentile was accused of the murder. Would anyone entertain the idea of putting the entire Russian people and all of Russian literature on trial? If an Italian was found guilty of murder, would the entire Italian people be blamed for the crime? But the exception are the Jews. When one Jew is on trial, you put all the Jews on trial. That's why we're Adam, we're one. We may be 14 million bodies, but we're one soul. We're one person. We think differently, we may act differently, but we're really one. And when one Mendel Beilis was put on trial, the entire Jewish world stopped and stood by his side like one man. And the Jewish people trembled for his welfare, because where goes Mendel Beilis would go the Jewish world. This defense of Mendel Beilis left a deep impact on the jury. And shockingly, they dropped the charges against Mendel Beilis, seeing for what they were, just anti-Semitic, old-fashioned anti-Semitism of the old-fashioned blood libel. But this remains part of who we are. We are one. We are Adam. When you strengthen one part of the body, you strengthen the entire body. And so we start by asking, what can we do to help understand that we're one body? And so when we increase in our prayer, when we increase in our charity, when we increase in our good deeds, it helps the entire family. I want to say how proud I am of all the relief agencies, of all countries of the world, but specifically I want to focus on 200 families, 200 of my colleagues that were sent over the last 30 years to open up centers in Ukraine. Chabad centers, Jewish schools. And they became the Jewish establishment of this country of 350,000 Jews. And they remained up until last Thursday, Friday. They stayed at their post caring for the elderly, caring for orphans. And until their city was literally being bombed by the Russians, they waited to find passageways for each of their members of their community. How they managed to get buses, I don't know, but they pulled it off. And cars for each of them to get to the closest border they can. And there at these borders, they were met by other colleagues of ours that were sent to all of these neighboring countries during the last 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And today, as we speak here together, there are tens of thousands of Jewish refugees and Jewish families that have managed to get out of Ukraine to get to their closest borders and are being well taken care of by these neighboring countries. Credit has to go to all these countries nearby that opened their borders. It wasn't always this way. When there would be war and refugees, countries would close their border and say, not here, sorry, it's your problem. We know this better than anyone else. Where were our parents able to run during the Holocaust? Which country took them in? How many stories did we hear of countries turning their backs and saying, not here, only to be sent right back into the Nazis' hands? Shiploads of Jews coming even to our country, to the United States of America, and told to turn around and go back, and where they all met their unfortunate fate. So today, when we hear 2 million have already left, and I know it's tragic, and of course it's tragic, and it's hard to fathom the number of 2 million in the span of 14 days. 2 million people to have left their homes in 14 days, and the numbers will only go up. But that means that 2 million people have been taken in by other countries. This is unprecedented. That countries are there welcoming them, taking care of them, putting them in hotel rooms. I've heard from colleagues of mine in the country of Moldavia, they've literally booked hotel after hotel after hotel after hotel. And funds were coming in from all over the Jewish world, especially from Israel and from the United States and from other countries in Europe, booking up complete hotels and just putting families in. What will come, I don't know. What will be next week, we don't know. But for now, these families are safe. Israel has started flying in refugees now, plane load after plane load. We'll talk more about this soon. But perhaps it's time for the 350,000 Jews from Ukraine to consider making Aliyah and finding a homeland. The Golan Heights is a nice, beautiful place and could use some housing there. The Negev is beautiful. We have room for them in the Holy Land of Israel. Yes, it's going to take a lot of support from the country of Israel, the people of Israel, and the Jewish people all over the world. But there is a home. There is a place where they can go. Obviously, our concern is the well-being of all Ukrainians, not just our fellow Jews. But I say that it's because we are Jews that we know what it's like to be targeted by those who feel they're stronger than us. Because we are Jews, we know what it's like to have an evil dictatorship take away our freedom. Because we are Jews, we know what it's like to face extinction. Because we are Jews, we have faced pharaohs before. We have faced Hitlers before. We have faced Stalins before. And unfortunately, we know what it's like to be refugees. This is not some once upon a time story for us. When my father told the story of his life on a videotape a few years before his passing, and you hear from what country to the next country, he ran from this country to that country to that country. In the middle of the night, he escaped here and ran to there. You understand what being a refugee is like. You're traveling with one little suitcase that you can carry in your hand, and in that one suitcase, that's all you have. Your life's possessions have been reduced to one suitcase, where you have a few items of clothing, nothing more. The few dollar bills or whatever currency you have in your pocket is all that you have, because you have no access to any savings accounts or checking accounts or investment accounts. We know what it's like. And so we care, and so we cry, and so we stand in solidarity, and so we speak out, and so we support, and we rally, and we protest. This is a very unique moment in time for us as Jews and for all of humankind. And I say this now for two reasons. In most past wars, where there was a large Jewish presence, we always became the target. The Jews became the scapegoat. The Jews became the victim. There is a very large Jewish population in both of these countries at war. There's some 200,000 Jews in Russia. There's some 350,000 Jews in Ukraine, minus those who left already. But that's over 500,000 Jews combined. And both of these countries have had history with us, not the kindest history. In Russia, we don't have to go back too far. Stalin didn't really like the Jews. Khrushchev didn't like the Jews. Brezhnev. Communism. Remember the Iron Curtain. Judaism outlawed. If you're familiar with the story of Anatoly Sharansky, his story of being put on trial in Moscow for espionage for Israel. Why? Simply because he put a request that he be allowed to make Aliyah to Israel. For that, he was put on trial for espionage, in a fake trial. And unlike Mendel Beilis, he was not found innocent. He was found guilty, and he spent years in a slave labor camp, until, thanks to the efforts of his wife and President Ronald Reagan, in which they pressured Gorbachev to release Anatoly Sharansky, so he is part of the Israeli establishment today and part of the Israeli government up until a few years ago. Read his story of the heroics of what they faced, of what they were up against, living in Russia. And Jews have been living in Ukraine for a millennium. You know, in the 17th and 18th centuries, 80% of all Jews of the world lived in that part of the world that we call Ukraine. No other Jewish community in the world suffered like the Ukrainian Jewish community. The pogroms of 1648 and 1649 by the Cossacks murdered between 100 to 300,000 Jews in the most horrific of ways. And the pogroms of the following decades and the following centuries by the Cossacks were horrendous, were shocking. During the Civil War, after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, 100,000 Jews of Ukraine were murdered. Before the Holocaust, there were 2.4 million Jews living in Ukraine. They suffered terribly under Stalin's regime. Jews in the former Soviet Union during the 1920s and 1930s, Judaism, the practice of Judaism, was completely annihilated and reduced to underground movements where they would secretly keep the mitzvot, whatever they possibly could. But it was outlawed. And if that's not bad enough, comes June 1941 and Hitler invades the Soviet Union. And over the next 2 years, 1.6 million of the 2.4 million Jews were murdered. In Babi Yar, the ravine in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, the Germans, with the help of Ukrainian anti-Semites, massacred in 2 days 34,000 Jews. And there stood in Babi Yar up until 2 weeks ago this memorial to the Jews that were murdered in Babi Yar. After the war, many Jews returned to Ukraine, but then they were facing the tyranny of communism and anti-Semitism. Most of them hid their Judaism completely. And Ukraine is, at the same time, is the home of some of the greatest of our leaders. You're familiar with some of these names. The Baal Shem Tov, born in Ukraine. The Maggid of Mezrich, born in Ukraine. Rab Nachum of Chernobyl, born in Ukraine. Rav Nachman of Breslov. Rab Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, born in Ukraine. From the greatest of our holiest people, born in this part of the world. Do you know that 3 of Israel's prime ministers since 1948 came from Ukraine? Moshe Sharet, Levi Eshkol, and Golda Meir. So many of the poets of our people, Shalom Aleichem, Echad Ha'am, Bialik, came from Ukraine. But once Hitler wipes out Ukrainian Jewry, it seems that it's all over. And then miracle of miracle takes place. 30 years ago, the Soviet Union collapses and freedom breaks out. And we witness in our lifetime a resurrection. A miracle, I say, as great as the splitting of the Red Sea. Because those of you that remember the 70s well and the early 80s, we always believed there was going to be a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. These were 2 superpowers going head to head during the Cold War. And if I would have told you that at some point all of these countries would find their freedom, you would have said there must have been World War III that brought it about. But how did it happen? It happened simply by the masses of the people demonstrating in the streets, the people speaking up for freedom. The people speaking up had no guns, had no tanks, and they were facing the most powerful army in the world, the army of the Soviet Union. And who was victorious in that battle? Who won that battle? The people. And their leaders went running for their lives. And freedom broke out. Freedom for all people and freedom for our Jewish brothers and sisters who had been locked behind the Soviet Union, locked behind that Iron Curtain. Their freedoms denied them, their freedoms of religion denied them for hundreds of years. And over the last 30 years, both in Russia and in Ukraine and in Moldavia and in all of the old Soviet Union, Jewish centers begin springing up from the ground. More so, the governments were returning places of worship that used to belong to the Jews back to the Jewish community. They were helping restore them. You may have seen the post that I put on Facebook 2 weeks ago. The largest Chabad center in the world is not in New York and it's not in Jerusalem. And unfortunately, it's not here in Agoura Hills, California. It's in Ukraine. Magnificent, beautiful Jewish community centers run by these 200 families that I spoke about. I heard on one of the Zoom broadcasts, one of our California boys, Rabbi Levitansky, who is the Chabad rabbi in Sumy, Ukraine. So he told us over that when he first got there, the problem was immigration. The problem was his visas. He was officially a visitor moving there with his wife. And so they had that every 6 months he needed to leave the country in order to come back in as a visitor, get a visa for another 6 months. And he had to do this every 6 months. Leave and come back. leave and come back, until he hired an attorney that said, you know something, what you need to do is file to become a citizen of Ukraine. Get your papers in order and become a citizen, and you won't have to do this anymore. So he fills out all the paperwork with the help of this attorney, and he sends it in. He gets a call from the head of the Department of Citizenship there. It's a woman who says, I'd like to meet with you. And he meets with her, and she says to him, I want you to know that I'm denying your application, but I wanted to tell you personally why. Anyone that was brought up in Santa Monica, California, and says they want to become a citizen of Ukraine, you're either crazy or you're a spy. We don't want crazy people here, and we sure don't want spies. And with that, she stamps denied. Well, it took a few more births of children for him to be able to prove his loyalty, that he's there to stay, and he's there for the community. And yes, although now he's in some neighboring countries, he brought along 300 refugees with him to make sure that they find their way to safety. And he looks forward to when he can be back in safety and security at his post. So what's the point I'm trying to make with all of this? The miracle of the past 3 decades is the stuff of great prophets, of millions of Jews finding their freedom. Do you know during the collapse, followed the collapse of the Soviet Union, over 1 million Jews immigrated to Israel? 1 million. The percentage size of what Israel grew in a span of a few months, allowing in 1 million immigrants, is not matched in history of any country to have, except in that many, a percentage of how many they originally had in their country in the first place. Proportionately, it was a vast undertaking. You can't just take in 1 million Jews and say, okay, welcome. You need housing, you need schools, you need jobs, you need dentists, you need doctors, you need clothing. This is the stuff of prophecies. Isaiah talks about the wings of eagles, of people coming home on the wings of eagles. Perhaps what Isaiah saw was the airport in Tel Aviv having a plane land literally minute after minute loaded with Jews coming over from the old Soviet Union. The wings of eagles. In the past, a war would mean the Jews would be the target and the focus. But in this war, something smells different. It's idiotic and it makes little sense. Isn't it weird that Putin says he's invading to free Ukraine from the neo-Nazis? He doesn't say he's invading to wipe out Jews. He doesn't blame the Jews of his country. This is what always happened in the past. And now seeing how evil this man can be, and he sure is evil, it's even more shocking and goes completely against KGB policy, which is where he brought up, and communist standards, that he has always been protective over the Jews in this country. Dictators never like the Jews. This past Shabbat, you may have seen it in the news, you may have missed it. The Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, an observant Jew, got on a plane and he flew to Moscow. And he met with Putin to try to mediate a ceasefire. He is the only head of state that has spoken face-to-face to Putin. He's the only head of state that speaks both to Putin and to Zelenskyy. I don't know if since the days of King Solomon, we have been called on by the world to try to be the peacemakers between superpowers. It is so odd. Now, I'm not complaining, and I'm not complimenting Putin in any way. I'm merely pointing out that there's something very different at this point versus the entire history of our world. That an Israeli prime minister, a Jewish prime minister, is being looked at by both sides to see, is there a way to broker a peace? Now, I don't know, and none of us know, will there be any success in those talks? I don't know, and we all don't know, is it just some propaganda? I don't know. But the very point that the president of Germany and the president of France and all the presidents of Europe wanted to meet with Putin, and he said no. But Bennett, he let in. Something smells different. Is it not odd? Would it not be grand? Would it not be, if they decide to hold their summit in Jerusalem, perhaps? The city of peace, Yerushalayim, that is its very name, that can hopefully bring the end to the suffering for all of the people of Ukraine, and I should point out for many of the people of Russia as well. Because I do not believe the people of Russia want this war. Which leads to my second point. I can't remember, and you think if you can, a human being so loved and admired by the world for his courage and conviction as President Zelenskyy. I wasn't alive to hear or to see Winston Churchill. To see a man become the world's hero in an era when no one is respected anymore, when politics has turned into a blood sport, where the goal is to destroy and to hate, where social media allows anyone and everyone to post anything negative about another human being, and to suddenly see a man so embraced by all of the world, to receive standing ovation after standing ovation from every government body. Do you remember in your lifetime a human being so embraced? Time magazine puts him on his cover, uniter of the world. And for him to be a Jew, a proud Jew. Who would have ever believed that a Jew can be thrust into that limelight? That the good people of all the world, and it makes no difference our political parties and our political differences, and not just our country, but Europe as well, and even those countries that remain neutral during the Holocaust, have embraced this particular Jew and admired him for his courage and his conviction. And in many ways, he is shaming us into supporting his country and to supporting this battle of, as I call, of David versus Goliath of 2022. Who would have ever believed? Think about this. We're about ready to celebrate the holiday of Purim next week. On Purim, we read the book of Esther, the story of Esther. Esther has no intention of being a queen. She's not raised to be a queen. She has no desire to go into politics. She has no desire to lead. She wants to live her simple life in Shushan. She has no training in personal courage to step up to the evil Haman who wants to destroy and wipe out every single Jew on the face of the earth. She's a simple person minding her own business. And what happens? Destiny met up with her. God had other plans in mind for Esther. Zelenskyy was a comedian. He was a performer. He was a good dancer on Dancing with the Stars of Ukraine. I think he won. If you see some of his old clips, he was pretty funny, even though I don't understand the word he's saying. His facial expressions were pretty funny. His dance moves were very, very good. And then he gets a new role. He's on television, and in this television show, he plays the role of president. Okay, so he's now an actor playing the role of president. What happens? The last president of Ukraine was quite corrupt, and he's called out by this country, by our country, and by all of his people for his corruption. And the people want change. This is not what democracy should look like. We didn't fight for democracy to have corrupt leaders. We want change. So the comedian who plays a role of president on a television show thought it would be quite funny if he, a Jewish comedian in Ukraine, runs for president of Ukraine. What could be funnier than that? His wife was quoted as saying she found out that her husband was running for president on a post on Facebook that he put. Well, if this is not a modern day story of biblical proportion, of destiny meeting up with someone that God has in mind for a particular role at a particular time in a particular place, God has his way of picking his people. He had Esther win a beauty pageant that she never wanted to enter, and she became queen just when history would need her. King David was a shepherd in the field, having no desire to become king of Israel. Read the stories of Menachem Begin. Read the stories of the great leaders of our people. They had no desire to play that role in history, but history demanded their entry into playing a role for all of the world. And Zelenskyy becomes president just when history would need someone to play the role, not as an actor, but in real life, of standing up to the Goliath of our time, of standing up to tyranny, of standing up to evil, of standing up to a bully leader, a dictator. Who would stand up to Putin? Even America says to Zelenskyy in the early days of the war, we'll send you a plane to escape. That was the way we dealt with things. We took the Shah of Iran out of Tehran. We help these leaders as their country is about to fall. Get out of the country. We'll fly you to safety. Thank you for your service. We're good at doing that. And what does he say? Without speechwriters, without preparations. I don't need a ride, I need your ammunition. Facing a powerful force, his capital literally surrounded, and he refuses to leave. And he's not in hiding in a bunker, as you saw yesterday when he does his press conference, and he does it from his Oval Office, from the office of the presidency. In the past 2 weeks, this man, this proud Jew that finds himself in the history of the world, lecturing the world and world leaders on what freedom means. It's amazing that an individual can speak these words from the heart and tell us Americans what freedom really means, what it means to fight for freedom, what it means to have your rights denied you, what it means not to have freedom, and what life is all about, and what sacrifice for life is all about. And the world is beginning to listen. First, the masses of people, then the vote in the United Nations of a few days ago, and now heads of state are suddenly listening to what this man is saying. A Yidala lecturing the world. I want to read to you the talk that he gave, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, to the House of Parliament in Great Britain. Now, if you've ever watched that House in session, It's very similar to the Knesset in Israel, and that's not a compliment necessarily. Knesset in Israel, you don't get to finish a sentence. You start speaking and someone yells on top of you. And the insults, they're in Hebrew, so perhaps you don't fully quite understand them, but they're strong insults. And it doesn't matter who the individual speaking may be. You speak, others have something to say above you, louder than you. Even if you're the Prime Minister of Israel and you get up there to speak, you're going to be heckled throughout the entire speech. Well, Great Britain, and maybe that's where Israel learned it from, that's what takes place. If you've ever watched it in session, Prime Minister has his podium on one side of the room, the opposition's on the other side, he says a few words, everyone yells, oh, no, no, or yay, depending which side of the room they are. And here they all are in one chamber. And they're listening to one man who's not even there live, who's coming to them via a television set. And I read you his words. Bear with me. Mr. Speaker and all members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I am addressing all the people of the United Kingdom and all the people from the country with a big history. I'm addressing you as a citizen, as a president of also a big country, with a dream and a big effort. I'd like to tell you about the 13 days of war, the war that we didn't start and we didn't want. However, we have to conduct this war. We do not want to lose what we have, what is ours, our country, Ukraine. Just the same way you once didn't want to lose your country when the Nazis started to fight your country and you had to fight for Britain. 13 days of this struggle. On day one, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we were attacked by cruise missiles. Everybody woke up, people with children, the entire Ukraine, and since then we have not been sleeping. We have all been fighting for our country with our army. On day two, we have been fighting airstrikes, and our heroic military servicemen on the islands have been trying to fight. When Russian forces demanded that we lay down arms, we continued fighting, and we did feel the force of our people that opposed the occupants until the end. The next day, the artillery started fighting us. Our army showed us who we are. On day 4, we started taking people captive. We have not been torturing them. We remain humane even on day 4 of this terrible war. On day 5, the terror against us took place against children, against cities, and constant shelling has been taking place around the country, including hospitals. And that didn't break us, and that gave us feeling of being on the side of truth. On day 6, the Russian rockets fell on Babi Yar. That is the place where the Nazis killed thousands of people during the Second World War. And 80 years after the Russians hit at them for the second time, and even churches are getting destroyed by shelling. On day 8, we saw Russian tanks hitting the atomic power station, and everybody then understood that this is the terror against everyone. On day 9, there was a meeting of NATO Congress, without the results we were looking for. Yes, we did feel that unfortunately the alliances don't always work properly, and the no-fly zone cannot be enforced. On day 10, the Ukrainians started protesting and stopping the armored vehicles with their own hands. On day 11, the children and cities were being hit in hospitals as well with the rockets and constant shelling, and on that day we realized that Ukrainians became heroes, entire cities, children and adults. On day 12, the losses of the Russian army exceeded 10,000 people killed, and also including the general. And that gave us hope that there will be some kind of responsibility for those people in front of the court. On day 13, in the city of Mariupol that was attacked by the Russian force, a child was killed. They do not allow any food, any water, and people started panicking. I think everybody can hear that people do not have water over 13 days of the situation. Over 50 children have been killed. These are the children that could have lived, but these people have taken them away from us. Ukraine was not looking to have this war. The Ukraine have not been looking to become big, but they have become big over days of this war. We are the country that are saving people despite having to fight one of the biggest armies in the world. We have to fight the helicopters and the rockets. The question for us now is to be or not to be. Oh no, this is a Shakespearean question. For 13 days, this question could have been asked, but now I can give you a definitive answer. It's definitely yes to be. And I would like to remind you the words that the United Kingdom have already heard, but they are so important again. We will not give up, and we will not lose. We will fight until the end at sea and in the air. We will continue fighting for our land, whatever the cost. We will fight in the forests and in the fields, on the shores and in the streets. I'd like to add that we will fight on the banks of different rivers, and we're looking for your help, for the help of all civilized countries and civilized people of the world. We're thankful for this help, and I'm very grateful to you, Boris, referring to the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Please increase the pressure of sanctions against this country, Russia. Please recognize this country as a terrorist state, and please make sure our Ukrainian skies are safe. Please make sure to do what needs to be done and what is stipulated by the greatness of your country. Glory to Ukraine and glory to the United Kingdom. These are powerful words coming from someone not trained for this. Doesn't have the eloquence necessarily of a Winston Churchill, but he has the heart, the courage, the determination, the strength that has inspired a world and inspired people of all of the world, and in so many ways has united a world. So let's pray together that, as we say when we celebrate the holiday of Purim, that those miracles that took place during the days of Purim were by Yomim Haheim Bizman Hazeh. On those days, Bizman Hazeh, in this period of time. Let's hope that history repeats itself, and that the miracles of the past, the miracles in which we have seen the weak able to defeat the strong, the small able to defeat the many, and be able to stand up against the mighty. We've seen it in David versus Goliath. We've seen it in the history of modern-day Israel in the Six-Day War. We have seen these miracles in the past. We've seen it in the days of Hanukkah. We've seen it in the days of Purim. Let us see it again. First, the hope of all is that indeed that peace breaks out and that Putin decides to back down and withdraw his army. That's our hope. That's our dream. But in the event that he refuses to do so and continues his unjustified wiping out of a country of men, women, and children that have no arms pointing at him, then indeed let the people led by their president Zelenskyy, let them continue facing the miracles on the battlefield. Let them be able to be successful in defending their homeland and bringing freedom for their entire country. I want to wish you all, it shall be a wonderful week for all of mankind, for all good people all over the world. God should indeed send his ultimate Mashiach, his Savior of all of mankind, that we should have no more war, no more bloodshed, no more illness, and only goodness and kindness shall take over the entire world. Be well, everyone. Let us hope for good days ahead.